Hello, welcome to How to Write an HR End of Year Report amid COVID-19 with me, Anita Wiafe-Asinor of Omlafrica. The areas I'm going to cover following the introductions and a little about Omlafrica will be to look at the end of year report writing, taking into account COVID-19, talk a little bit about some of the aspects of the workforce report, and then look at some of the key HR analytics in relation to the workforce on COVID-19 you should consider including in your report, and then conclude. Omlafrica is a strategic core human resource management consultancy established in Ghana in 2010 with a branch in the UK covering UK and Europe. Our specialist areas are broken down into 4 areas: advisory and strategy, HR audits, talent management, HR outsourcing. You can find out about the services we offer under each of these 4 areas on our website, which is www.omlafrica.com. Some examples of the kind of work we do is in relation to compliance work, so that's all the audit, collective bargaining, negotiations, agreements, reviews, terms and conditions reviews, advisory on the labor laws, regulations, industry regulations, etc. So all around compliance, HR restructuring, so HR due diligence, HR systems, generalist HR around performance management, job evaluation, salary structure development, implementation, leadership recruitment, employee assessment. So if you want your employees, existing or new employees, to be go through a psychometric testing, profiling, or development centers, we can help you with that. Training and development for both public and in-company tailored programs. And then, of course, organizational development, where we do all our change management projects, strategy, cultural work for our clients. We work across sectors in Ghana and Africa-wide, a team of consultants with over 50 years experience, and we have done well to fuse our local and international expertise together to bring you very good HR insights as well as HR services. Okay, so moving on to the webinar at hand, where we're going to be looking at how to write an HR end-of-year report amid COVID-19. And here, really, our focus is to write a report that is data-driven and not necessarily just on kind of our usual HR tasks that we've completed, all right? Now, this report is very important. I'm not really going to go into report writing because the assumption is that you already are writing reports. You're just kind of seeing how to particularly maybe write this particular report, being as we've not had a usual year. Okay, so the learning objectives, as you know with me, I always want to have a learning objectives. It guides the conversation, as well as also it lets you know what to expect. So by the end of this session, you should be able to prepare and write an HR annual report amid COVID-19, enhance your report writing skills, understand how to write HR reports, and then be able to link your HR reporting to current and future needs of the business. So what is an HR report? Well, fundamentally, an HR report is an analytical method used to display human resource related stats, insights, and metrics with the primary purpose of improving the workforce performance, recruiting procedures, and other relevant HR processes with the help of the HR dashboards and KPIs. So for me, this report that I'm talking about, I'm not talking about you giving a report on your day-to-day activities. So for example, you know, you did your recruitment, you know, you hired 10 people or something like that. I'm talking about insights that actually gives the leadership information to make decisions. So we're talking about being, you know, insight-led and data-driven type of reports here. Okay, so what's an HR KPI? Of course, in order to do an insight-led data-driven report, we have to work with KPIs. And when we're talking about the HR KPI, we're saying that it's really about metrics to spot trends, identify inefficiency, capitalize on strength, and to fortify weaknesses in a number of key areas within the HR. It's making your human resource efforts, activities, and initiatives the best they can possibly be for departments across the organization using data. All right. So this report, we're talking about giving the qualitative as well as the quantitative. All right. And why do we do an annual report? Well, an annual report enables companies to evaluate the human resource activities that affect the company's performance each year, to drive competitive strategies, and also to determine if action needs to be taken in the HR environment to increase the dynamics of the HR strategy. And also it's about the HR department, which is quite core to the business, reporting on its performance as well as providing key insights into the workforce management, what has happened in the workforce in that fiscal year. So it's a very important report. I know that within it, a lot of you do shorter monthly reports, quarterly or bi-monthly, but the annual report literally encapsulates everything that has happened in a year and helps to actually plan and make decisions for the next year. Okay, so now that we've kind of done some basic definitions there, we can now start to look at what we're talking about here, which is the end of year report. And for me, you always know, those of you who know me, I'm always saying that we must, as HR practitioners and leaders, we must be insights-led. We must want to understand and find out why things are happening and find insights to help us improve and to add more value into our organizations. And the way we do that is through data, being data-driven, collecting relevant, hard-hitting, especially bottom-line hitting, people-hitting data and analyzing it and providing the insights to help our leadership make decisions concerning the human capital and the business strategy. So for me, it's very, very important to be insight-led and data-driven in all aspects of the human capital management or the human resource department. So in terms of the end of year report, before obviously we start writing the report, we need to kind of prepare the information, prepare ourselves to write this report. So the focus must be that we want to write a report on our KPIs and our key results as a function, all right? And at the same time, based on that, because we're reporting on our performance, what we've done, we're also reporting on the workforce in terms of what has happened, all right, over in the current fiscal year or the end of this current fiscal year. So the first step in preparing to write the HR report is really, you've got to do this very simple checklist of 5 questions. So before you start, you have to ask yourself, do I have understanding of the workplace needs, accomplishments, and business strategy? Do I have an HR strategy? Do I have the data capturing systems in place? Have you had the data capturing systems in place? So, for example, if you want to do some kind of analysis on demographics, if you've not been capturing the data, you're not going to be able to do that. If you want to do analysis on attendance, if you're not capturing the data, you're not going to be doing that. So it's kind of just doing a little quick checkpoint to make sure the key things you need to have in place are in place before you start. So, do I have a clear HR KPI for the year? Am I clear on what that was? Have I discussed with the Chief Executive Officer and senior management the purpose of the HR report, areas that they want focus, the key analytics to include? So this is just kind of a few just checkpoints for you to just kind of go through with yourself or your team. And then the second point is to review data. So if we've done all the first step, we now need to gather the information we require to write the report. And then we need to review all the data for accuracy and completeness, and then make any corrections if necessary. Now, I must stress that, if you work with data that is not accurate, you are literally undermining yourself, because people will lose trust the next time you bring them information. So it's really important to make sure that you update and check that the information you're using to write your report is accurate and is complete. All right. You know, sometimes you present information and people ask for the sources and so on and so forth. You don't want a situation where you've not done this due diligence and the information you actually present is not accurate. It kind of undermines you, the HR manager, HR leader, and the department. So some examples of data may be, you know, COVID-19 data, attendance records, turnover, performance appraisal documents or outcomes, disciplinary grievance reports or issues, etc. I mean, we're going to delve into this a little bit more, but when we're talking about reviewing the data, we're talking about the data you're going to be using to write your report, or report the data that you're going to draw from to write your report. So that needs to be accurate in order to use. Then the third point here should be defining the report structure. So, you know, people use different types of report structure. You may already have a structure. You may just need to insert additional titles or subheadings or something into your current template. You don't have to change your whole template. You can just insert what's relevant or what you need to add to your current template. I'm just trying to give a suggestion or just an outline for the purpose of this webinar, but you know, you may already have a template. So if you have it, you can just use it and just add the bits from this that you think you need to add. So you need an outline, and what I'm suggesting is that you know, the report is very formal. It should be very professional. We shouldn't take it for granted that, well, it's just going to our leadership who know us or our board who know us, so we don't put in the effort. The report should be well presented. All this gives you credibility as the HR leader, as the HR manager. When you are putting your reports and things and you make it very formal, people actually are now kind of pushed to actually read it because they can see the effort you've put in. And it's also very good reflection for you and for your department. So the outline I have may be a bit different from yours, but I guess you run with the one you're most comfortable with. So you want to have a report cover page, and I'm going to break it down into these areas in the subsequent slides. You want to have an introduction, overall objectives, key HR performance indicators. You want to have the key highlights, looking at the HR achievements, the HR challenges. You can include benchmarking and trends. Some people may not necessarily do benchmarks, some may do just a trend, some may do both. It's up to you. Workforce reports where you're including the analytics, and then of course the conclusion, and then the next fiscal year plans for next year. All right. Step 3, you need to know your audience, or this is step 4, sorry. You need to know your audience, users, and partners. So you need to know that this report is going to the senior management. Specifically, we mean the C-suite, so CEO, CFO, COO, CIO, or whoever represents your senior management. The board of directors, this report may be going to internal, external auditors, investors, stakeholders, and financial community or employees. So the point is, you need to know who is this report going to, because it has an impact on, of course, the information you put, how you write it, the tone, everything. So be clear on who the audience is. But for the purpose of this webinar, we are talking about this report going to either the senior management or the board. But actually, of course, it can also be given to other stakeholders who are of that level. Then relevant information per audience. So for example, the CEO, board, and senior management, you know, you need to know what information they're interested in. So they're not probably going to be very interested in a lot of the detail of the things that HR is doing. You know, maybe HR visited the canteen every day since COVID started to check that people are social distancing. I think it's nice to know, and that may be something you may talk about in your monthly, but at the end of the year, that's not really what the CEO or the board or any senior management is trying to look at. the kinds of things they are wanting to look at is things like maximizing the shareholders' value, productivity, the impact of COVID-19 on the workforce, labor costs, revenue, talent status, workforce recovery plans. Like, these are kind of top high-end information that helps them make decisions, and that also helps them have that overall view of what's happened in this fiscal year. So that's really where you need to be focusing a lot of your conversation in your report. Then the last step is really drafting a report. So here you want to construct a written analysis for each area of focus, one at a time. Your analysis should contain an explanation of the workforce data, a comparison of the data with past practices and current labor trends. That's what I was mentioning when I talked about the benchmark and trends. Include a recommendation for improvement in each area if it warrants it. Use graphs, charts, tables to visually display your findings and trends that you have identified and that you are reporting on. A lot of the time, our reports don't include the graphical or the numbers. It's just kind of just qualitative. But the numbers and visual displays of findings really helps people to understand and see very quickly what we're saying the impacts are. So you need to make sure you do that using the data that you have. Keep track of your methods of analysis in case you need to explain it to your audience or they ask to see it. So if you're talking about the turnover, maybe the leadership will want to see the actual raw data you're talking about. You need to be able to show. You need to keep a trail of the formulas or analysis that you do, so that if you're asked to explain, you are able to explain. And then you need to also do research to support your analysis or add to your analysis and findings as necessary. So for example, if you talk about, maybe salary reduction, but then, there was a survey done by a leading organization that kind of indicates how much salary was reduced in industries, of which your industry is one. And you notice that actually we were quite above what they've said. You may want to use that as a support to maybe highlight the fact that, yes, we reduced our salaries, but actually it wasn't as high as in the industry average. It was actually below or something like that. So if you have information, you want to tap into information to kind of support some of your points or areas of comparison, that's very good to do. It kind of further substantiates your report. Okay, so that's the preparation, literally just getting things together, get information together in order to write the report. So now we move on to writing the report. And for me, a report needs to just do three things. It needs to be easy to read, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be concise. Sometimes if we don't, and that's where if you're using tables and graphs and charts, it can really help reduce your numbers, like the number of words you're writing, because the tables, graphs, and charts will actually show the information a bit more simplified, a bit more concise. All right, but this is the three things that should run through your mind as you do your report. It should be easy to read, accurate, and concise. So starting with the first point I made in terms of the structure. So report cover page. So literally, really, this is like the company logo, the title, which is the HR Annual Report 2020 or 2021, or just the HR Annual Report. That's up to you. Prepared by, prepared for, so that who is it for? Is it for a specific person, maybe the CEO? Is it for a specific group? So you just put who you prepared it for. And then prepared by would of course be your name, your title, and of course your department. But you may have this differently on your template. That is fine. I'm just talking through my template as a guide, just to help with the conversation. So introduction section is really, what is the report about? What's the HR Annual Report about? So the purpose and nature of the report, you want to just give a brief introduction there. So e.g., for example, to provide management with information on the performance of the HR department and insights into the workforce management for the fiscal year. So something like that, or something simpler, but literally your intro is just kind of setting the scene of your report. Then the next point was the overall objectives of the company. So you need to know, you would know because you'd have set it last year to do for this year. So you need to list what were the overall company objectives, targets for this fiscal year, and you can do that also by department. Now you can represent this as a table so that you can put the numbers. If you're going to do by department, you put all the department, then you put the number of objectives and targets that they had, and then you under the overall will be the total of that, those numbers. So you want to have that because these are what you're going to speak to in your report. Then the overall objectives for the HR, all right? So what were they, all right? Okay, you need to know, you need to list them. And then the HR achievements. So in the HR achievements, you probably write some information or some summaries around it, but really we want to give back numbers. We want to give a visual of really what we've achieved. So some examples I've put here will be something like, you may want to talk about the percentage of the HR objectives set for this year that has been met, a percentage of HR targets, stroke KPIs that were met this year, that were set this year and were met, a percentage of the HR strategy that was implemented this year. You may want to talk about HR expense factor in relation to the total operating expenses, all right? You may want to talk about what percentage of the HR budget that has actually met budget, exceeded budget, or fell below budget, and other things. So this is just an example. So instead of us just kind of writing a narrative about all kinds of things, that's fine in your intro, in your summary, but really we want our hard-hitting achievements, you know, from our objectives, targets, and KPIs that were set. And then, of course, you've got to talk about the HR challenges. So here we're looking at COVID-19 impacts on the workforce, on the HR department. And then, of course, if there are other challenges, you'd also want to talk about that. Then we go on to looking at the HR key performance indicators. So what were they? All right. Now, for me, I've used the balanced scorecard approach. But you may be using a different approach or a different model in your organization, that's fine. The whole point is that we must be very clear in this report what our KPIs were, and then we must report on the achievement of those KPIs in our highlights. So under financial, we've got reduced, so maybe for the purpose of my report template, I'm saying that under financial, for example, your KPIs may be, you know, reduce recruitment costs by 15%, reduce training costs by 10% or by a certain amount of dollars. So maybe if the training budget, the training cost last year was $10,000, maybe this year, 2020, you were asked to cut it by $5,000, or is expressed in a percentage figure. Either way, it's a reduction in cost. And then reduce labor costs by 20%. So were these your financial KPIs? Of course, if they were, you'll be reporting on them on your highlights. Then under customer, what were your customer KPIs? So here I've got, for example, increase internal customer satisfaction rating to 8. So maybe last year when you did your internal customer, meaning employees, managers satisfaction with the HR service or HR support, you got 7 or you got 6, and this year you wanted the rating to go up to 8. So literally it's the KPIs that have been set. Reduce time to hire by 10 days. Maybe last year, you know, it was taking you 60 days to hire people. And this year you said, okay, we need to reduce that by 10 days. So it's going to take us 50 days instead of 60 days. So whatever the KPIs are for customer, that's your internal customers, you put here. Then process. So maybe you want to decrease the number of administrative errors by 30%. Maybe that was your, you know, your KPI for this year, or increase the recruitment efficiency by 25%. So what is the process KPIs that was set? And then lastly, learning and growth, increase the average time to achieve HR goals by 25%. So maybe the current percentage is too low, you want to increase it by 25%, or increase the employee engagement rating to 80%. Maybe last year when you did the employee engagement rating survey, the ratings were maybe 60% or 65 or 70%, and this year you wanted to increase it to 80%. So literally your KPIs are, you know, your core performance indicators that has been set, and I have used the balanced scorecard model here for this purpose of this example. Then once we've kind of indicated what they were, we now need to report on the KPI achievement. So did we achieve the 15% reduction in recruitment? Did we achieve the 10% reduction in training? Did we achieve reducing the time to hire to 10 days? So you want to report on what happened on there. And then also you now want to look at the key KPI challenges. So report on challenges, e.g. if you partially achieve the KPI, why? If you fully grade, if no achievement, why? All right, as to why you didn't do it. Please bear in mind that I've just tried to break each section up. You may only be reporting on objectives, all right? You may only be reporting on targets, but I'm just trying to break the sections up so that everyone is clear. So whichever model you're using, you are able to see how you can go about it in your reports, all right? Okay. So then we come on to benchmarking. So, you want to get benchmark information to support your indicators. So as I mentioned before, surveys, research, from organizations, or even maybe some you did yourself internally. If you want to benchmark, you don't have to add benchmarks, but it's usually a positive thing to do if you can. Then trends, do trend analysis against the measures for the last 3 years. So, for the example, the reduction in recruitment, if you look at it this year plus the other 2 years, were you actually able to achieve the 15%, or were there higher reductions in the previous years? And so, and if you did achieve it this year, was it more than the 15%? And is that because of COVID? And so you can do a lot of trend analysis there. It's always good to work with like the 3 years. You can go further if you have the data, but usually you're working with the minimum 3 years. So you do this trend analysis, and it's been very good to do the trend analysis because it can help you to plan, to implement, to evaluate HR initiatives, and of course the strategy. So you can do some trend analysis there as well. Then we move on to the workforce report. Okay, so all this is kind of like setting the scene so that the person reading the report very quickly sees what HR, was set to do, what the company is set to do, and what is outcome. And I think if you follow this kind of method where you're focusing on reporting on these objectives and targets and KPI, it just streamlines your report already. All right. So we now move on to the workforce report after we've kind of given the information from the HR, which is very much speaking to the performance of the HR. We now move into the workforce report. And here I'm just making a suggestion because I know people do different things. Some people will report on all 11 core areas of the HR function, e.g. performance management, talent, L&D, employee, they report on everyone. Some people just do a selected core functions of the HR. So they will not do all 11, maybe they will do 4, 5, 6, it all depends. They've selected based on what's important to the organization, or the organization wants the HR department or the HR leader to highlight. Some may also select priority areas per agreement with the leadership. So sometimes it's actually leadership saying, we just want information on this, all right? And the HR may just add a few summaries of its own. Or it's a combination of core function and selection. So that's really up to you how you do. It all depends on what you've been reporting. The point I'm trying to make here is, as we move on, is to strengthening it with the data side. And then of course, you also have to talk about the COVID-19 workforce report in terms of what the impact has been. I mean, as for the COVID-19, it's up to you whether you want to make it like a special report within your report, or just as I've done, is to add it under the workforce report, of which we will just talk about what has happened underneath it. Then, of course, you need to conclude your report. So that's like an overall summary of the HR and workforce performance, and just highlighting the main key things that have happened this year. Discussion on future activities and completion dates for next year. The next phase is to link the workforce strategy to future needs of the business. So that's the next fiscal year and beyond, which you'll be able to do because you would already know what is planned for next year, and you'll be able to align what the HR is going to do to ensure those objectives, targets, KPIs are met. Then you also need to talk about the fiscal plans of the HR. So you need to list the next fiscal year plan. So, next year's plan, basically, we're talking about. That you need to look at the HR strategy, you need to review and update the strategy because a lot of things have happened this year, And the HR strategy is definitely going to have to adjust as we look at the future of work. We look at this idea of the new normal and all the predictions and changes that have occurred. The strategy has to be reviewed and updated. You want to look at the objectives, targets, and KPIs of the strategy, which should also be updated if you're obviously reviewing an update. You need to look at your initiatives and projects you're going to do next year. You need to address the key challenges that you'd have discussed in your reports in the earlier sections. And then, of course, you need to obviously indicate and outline as to the COVID recovery plan for the workforce, all right? Which, of course, through all the discussions you've been having with the senior management, you'd already know where the direction or the focus is, and you'll be able to align that with what the workforce element is going to be in that recovery plan. Okay, so now we come on to looking at some of the analytics that you need to consider. Now, when we look at the earlier ones, I gave you some examples of some of the KPIs. You already know a lot of the KPIs. If you want to kind of get more specific KPIs under some of the key function, if you watch my other webinar, which is on setting meaningful KPIs, it's on our OML YouTube channel, the same place you're probably watching this, so you can watch that. That really goes into more about the HR KPIs, the strategic map, and there's a bit more details. You can pick a lot from there. But here, I wanted to focus on the analytics around COVID-19, because we're writing this report amid COVID-19, and we can't write our end of year report this year without discussing COVID. So I went through to kind of look at the types of KPIs that we need to be analyzing in the analytics. So number one, some examples, I'm probably not going to read all this, but some examples like, what percentage of the workforce were switched to work remotely due to the COVID-19. So under your COVID report, you may want to, when you're giving a narrative, you may want to give this data, all right, to support whatever you've written in the narratives. What were the key trend challenges concerning remote working? So you may want to highlight that. And of course, if you highlight challenges, you must do recommendations to address those challenges. So if the issue was connectivity, is it now, have you sorted it? Is it now you have to get better connection for staff? If it was security, have you now sourced a security agent? Agency. Whatever the challenge, you must make a recommendation. You must say how it was resolved, and if it hasn't been resolved, what you're suggesting should be the way forward. All right. We should never just give problems. We have to give recommendations and suggested solutions. What percentage of our workforce are currently not working due to COVID-19? You may want to report on that. A percentage of workforce reported positive for COVID-19. What are the trends in employee infection rates, and how do they compare to other countries, regions, and branches? So if you're an organization that has other branches or in other countries or other regions, you may want to do this comparator just to get the leadership to see what is happening in the regions or in the country or branches across the country. How are if you're not in any country region, you're just having one office, that's fine. You may just want to look at the infection rates. How are infection rates trending? Of course, if you're looking at it from the countries, regions, and branches that your company operates, you want to look at the trends there. What are the risk levels of our workforce in a given area based on their age distribution, existing medical conditions, and other relevant factors that you may also want to consider? And then a percentage of how many locations are or were significantly impacted by COVID-related absences. All right, so these are some of the things, the workforce analytics that you may want to look at, and of course, outside of the metric, you want to analyze and answer and explain to management, and then the impact, or if there's an action, what that should be. Then also we want to look at things like the average duration of employees being available due to COVID-19 illness or other. That's very important. What percentage of our infected workforce has recovered and returned to work, and maybe what percentage haven't, okay? What percentage of our temporarily remote workforce has returned to work on location? You may want to look at that. What is our current productivity capacity percentage? How long are impacted employees non-productive for? So when people get quarantined, all right, or when people actually have tested positive, how long are they away, are they not productive, meaning they are not working, all right? This is important because even though we know people have to quarantine for 14 days, if you do it for when someone has tested positive, it's going to be beyond that 14 days. Sometimes too, people are quarantined for more than 14 days, 21 days as well. It all depends. So it'll be good to kind of look at this particular analytic. How much productive capacity have we lost, all right, as a company through this COVID pandemic issue? A percentage of top talent, this is a very good one, a percentage of top talent laid off due to COVID-19 with previous performance ratings of 4 and 5. So we're talking about our outstanding and exceptional talent, not those who meet satisfactory. So we're not really talking about those who are the number 3s. If you want to, you can, but really top talent, we're talking about the 4 and 5, those who are scoring or rating 4 and 5 in your performance appraisals. How many of them have you had to lay off? How many of them have you had to make redundant or even terminated? So you may want to look at that. What percentage of employees have been made redundant because of COVID? What percentage have been terminated because of COVID? What percentage were furloughed due to COVID? How many people are probably even still on furlough? Is very important. And if there's an action for the management to take a decision, you want to highlight that as well. And then a percentage of employees with pay cuts or reduction, all right? What percentage were they, and are there still a percentage on pay cuts and reductions? And then, of course, this particular one, once you've done the analysis, you also want to make a recommendation on how you're going to phase back people's salaries back to normal if you're still having cuts and reductions. And then the cost of sickness absence due to COVID-19 for the fiscal year. All right, so what has been the cost of absence? Because, initially it was like, who's responsible? But of course, if people come to work and they are sick and, a lot of employers decided to carry the COVID as part of their sickness policy. So you really want to look at the cost of absence in relation to COVID-19. And you want to separate it from normal absence cost as well, because it's not every absence is going to be COVID related. So you want that analysis, I think, is a very important one to do. And then a percentage of employees on unpaid leave, all right? And, how many of them are you going to bring back? How many, you want to make that, you want to show that. Remember, some of these analytics that you're doing is you're going to lead to making recommendations for action. So you need to pick ones that are relevant to your organization, or ones that you want to report on under your COVID report, because it has an impact or it has to influence a decision in some way. Not all these analytics I've read out, it may be relevant to all of you. Not all of it you need to do. You just need to look at them and even create your own to help you to report on the COVID and then be able to make recommendations that are required. And then the percentage of employees exceeding annual leave entitlement. So people, your organization will have an annual leave entitlement. How many of the employees have actually exceeded those targets? You want to have a look at that. The other thing I wanted to also highlight is that when we're looking at the performance appraisals, we need to make sure that our managers, as well as ourselves, are paying attention to the fact that COVID-19 may have impacted performance in some ways. We just need to look at, in terms of the goals that were set last year that people were supposed to deliver this year, how much of that has been affected or impacted by COVID-19. All right, we need to take that into consideration. If people, for example, for example, if for the lockdown in your relative country or area, you were locked down for months, that's going to have an impact on productivity, especially if you're in an industry where you actually just stop work. All right, it's going to have an impact on performance. If you were in an industry where the back office could carry on working, but maybe the front office couldn't because of the nature of what you do, that's going to have an impact on not just individual performance, but department and organizational wide performance. So you need to make sure that you're doing the analysis on the actual outputs, the performance output, taking into account where COVID has had an impact. All right. And then, of course, what does this mean in terms of ratings? What are we going to do this year? Are we still going to rate people the normal way, or are we going to say, COVID has impacted so much, so this year we're just going to give a flat standard, or are we going to apportion a percentage of the impact we think COVID has had and take that out and then rate based on what's left? It's all up to you. These are some of the things you've got to think about, and you need to be able to report back to the management on what to do if already these discussions haven't already come up. And also, it's important to think about when we set the goals for the next fiscal year, so for next year or next 2 years, because we are still in the COVID. A vaccine has been found, but things are it's still it's still a long way away. So we have to work as if nothing is still the same until otherwise. So you also need to think about when you're setting the goals for the coming year. You need to also consider some of these circumstances around the COVID, all right, in order to make sure that the goals, the objectives, the targets, the KPIs that you set employees and their departments are actually successful and they are not unrealistic. And I'm saying that especially around the financials, because obviously there's been a lot of losses. Companies are going to want to recover their losses next year, but we've got to be realistic, because we know that our economies have had a hit. We know that people have lost their job. It's going to have an impact on the supply chain. It's going to have an impact on the consumer behavior, our customers' behavior, etc. So we need to be making sure that the targets and things we're setting, or our leaders are setting, are realistic. So if we go to board meeting or the leadership meeting and we see that actually this is really quite high and it may not be successful, we need to kind of find a way of explaining why we think maybe we need to review and bring it down to a manageable. If we exceed it, that's great. But if we create unrealistic expectations, that now puts a lot of pressure on a workforce which already is quite pressured, and we may not get the results we want. So basically just saying strike for balance on what is real and what needs to be done. Okay, so that's some of the analytics, metrics that you want to look at concerning COVID. I mean, there are plenty more, but I just try to focus on ones that are quite simple and basic, that most of us should have the data to kind of speak to some of these analytic points that I have made on here. Okay. So, so now this just brings us to the end, very short, this session, so you should now, have an idea as to how you're going to prepare and write your HR annual report. Like I said, this is really more a refresher because you're already writing reports. It's just kind of trying to highlight the things that we should still be making sure goes into our report this year amid COVID-19. And from that, if you are adding analytics, you're adding graphs, and you're speaking to your KPIs, definitely that's going to enhance your reports writing for this year. If you haven't been doing it before, and if you have, if you are able to now add the relevant matrix that have come in because of COVID-19, again, that's going to kind of enhance your report. And then I'm also hoping that if you haven't been writing your reports in this way, that this short session is actually giving you insights as to how you should be approaching your HR reports, or how you can adjust the way you currently write your reports to make it more meaningful and more impactful for your audience. And now you should also be able to see that, okay, now that I've gone through this, because it's very specific and it's really hitting on the bottom line, I should now be able to link to what we're going to do next year and what the business wants to do next year and the role of the HR in that. It's very, very important that our reporting is coming from the business perspective and is having the human element as well as the numbers element. Very, very important aspects to have in your report. Having a narrative report, a report that just kind of tells the stories or just gives updates on what's happening, is good. but it's not impactful. I mean, definitely there's a difference between just saying, oh, the COVID has really impacted the business. We had to lay some people off, and we've lost some of our best talent. Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. But it's so much more impactful to tell me the percentage of our talent that we lost and from which level, to tell me the impact, to share the impact with me. So how many of our employees were infected, and how has this, to give me the data is far more impactful than just kind of just telling me, which is just information, but it doesn't give me the insights that I'll get when you actually give me an analytic. And then it also helps me make a decision, because after you've given it, you're going to propose a way forward. All right. So, if we still have, we furlough this number of people and this number have returned, this number are still on furlough, you're going to make a recommendation that management needs to take a decision on whether to bring back those on furlough in phases, or to terminate those on furlough, etc. So each of these analytics too are going to come with a recommendation from you as the HR manager, the HR leader, or the HR department on what the management should do. It's not just you're just reporting it without any recommendations or direction on decisions. So when you write your reports in this way, it is more meaningful and people are likely to read it, because it's so focused. It forces you to be concise. And please remember to just be concise on the narratives and use the metrics to speak to what you're trying to share with the management. Now, some of you may be working with dashboards, whether it's Excel or whether it's an actual system. So you may be able to pull a lot of this information from your dashboard. So you don't have to do any formulas or analysis. You can just pull the report off your HMRSs or your analytics systems, or if you've been using Excel, you can pull the data. So I know some of you, it should not be difficult for you to pull your data and just kind of analyze and present them. Some of you may not have, and now you have to create, or at least put the data into a meaningful format so that you can draw the information out to do your report. All right. So whichever way it is, the important thing is that you do your report this year, reporting on COVID, but not just in narrative, but actually giving the data, the analytics around what has been happening or what has happened to your company specifically concerning the COVID on the workforce, in addition to reporting on other aspects of the workforce that is not necessarily anything to do with COVID, because you'd have had other objectives and targets and things that you have still achieved, or work, or the departments and employees have achieved regardless of COVID. So you need to report on all of those things. All right. And then just to recap, that if you want more on specifics, meaningful analytics, what is a KPI and what isn't, you can watch the other webinar, which really I go into that a little bit more in detail. This one, I just kind of wanted to highlight the approach to our report. So you can adjust your report. So I hope you found it useful. Of course, if you have any questions, or you want to just run, you can just message me, as on my social handles. So you can also follow us. I recommend following our YouTube channel, because going into next year, we're not necessarily going to be posting webinars and things we do in the social networks. We're probably just going to post them straight to our YouTube channel and send it to those in our actual network. So if you may not be on a YouTube channel all the time, but if you want to know when we post something, it's ideal for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Omlafrica YouTube channel, because that's where a lot of this will pass through. And then, of course, you can follow us as well on Omlafrica, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram. And of course, if you want to follow me directly, Anita Wiafe-Asinor, you can actually connect with me on my social handles, LinkedIn, Twitter, I'm all there. All right. And if you're in my WhatsApp group, you can obviously side message me if you have a question following watching this short webinar. I hope you found it useful, and do, of course, give me feedback as necessary. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. It's been a pleasure as always, and goodbye.